Okay, I say we go for it. So welcome everybody. Thanks for showing up. Thanks for being here. Thanks for being interested. My name is Jeff Tarrant. I'm the director of the NeuroMeditation Institute in Eugene, Oregon. I'm a psychologist and board certified in neurofeedback, and excited to share with you some of kind of what has been happening recently. I've actually been combining neurofeedback with meditation for quite a while, a number of years. And the process has gotten more refined as time has gone on, as equipment has improved and software has improved, and as our understanding of the brain and meditation has gotten stronger. And so that's really what we want to share today is some of the more recent progress in this area and some of the tools that we're using, things that make life a lot simpler to do this work than it was a few years ago. And so what I'm going to do is I'll put up a PowerPoint in just a moment because I figured it makes sense to start a little bit with some background of what we're talking about and why, for those of you that maybe aren't familiar with the neuromeditation approach. And then we'll get into the specifics about the system that we're going to be demonstrating. And we'll do a live demonstration. I roped my office manager, Kathleen, into being our meditation guinea pig today. So no pressure for Kathleen. She just has to meditate in front of all you guys with her data up on the screen. No problem. So anyway, appreciate Kathleen being willing to do that for us. If you have questions or comments, I would say, for the most part, probably use the chat function or the Q&A function. And Kathleen will be monitoring that so that when we get opportunities, we can address as many questions as possible. Hopefully, if we have a few minutes at the end, we can just open it up and have a conversation. But just in case, I would say until that point, go ahead and just type it in. And we'll get to as many as we can. All right, let me share my screen and get this PowerPoint up. So let's dive in. So, again, like I said, it seems to make sense to start at the beginning, provide some basic definitions and some understanding of where we're coming from with this work. And so the first thing is like, well, what the heck is neuromeditation? So if you're not familiar with that term, we're using that term really to talk about a brain-based approach to meditation. That's it, right? So neuromeditation. What is it that we can understand about the brain in different meditative states? And then how can we use that information to help us understand what the heck we're doing? Because what you'll see in a few moments is that all meditations are not created equal, meaning depending on how you're using your intention and how you're directing your attention, it impacts the brain differently. So we can't necessarily just put all different types of meditation into one bucket and assume that they're doing the same thing, because they're not. So what we have done is tried to organize meditations that have been studied in research into 5 categories. And I'm going to talk briefly about each one of these just so you have an orientation about what we're doing. And so these 5 styles are really based on the things that we just mentioned. How are you using your attention and intention? But then also, how is the brain being impacted by that? Because when you change your attention and intention, it changes which parts of the brain are involved and which brain waves are involved. So that's really what we're trying to do here. So rather than going through each one of these little short definitions, I think I'll just, as we go through each one, I'll just explain it there. Otherwise, it's just repetitive. So I wanted to just spend a minute kind of touching on each of these 5 styles. So the first is focus. And probably everybody is going to be familiar with what a focus meditation is, right? In some ways, it's the starting point for most meditation systems, where you're putting your full attention on one thing. So could be your breath, could be a mantra, could be an image of the Buddha, could be a candle flame. But the whole idea with this practice, sometimes called a concentration practice, is you're putting your full attention on one thing. Then, of course, we know that the mind wanders off, usually pretty quickly. And then your job becomes to catch the mind wandering and bring it back. So there's a lot of different ways to practice this, but they all have that basic formula in common. Now, because of what's happening in the brain when you do this type of practice, you're actually activating your frontal lobes, because the frontal lobes are involved in things like paying attention, sustaining attention, inhibiting other information. So you're actually, even though we think of meditation as being this quieting state, it depends. And it depends on what parts of the brain we're talking about. So for focus, you're actually increasing activity in the frontal lobes, but at the same time, you're decreasing activity in the default mode network, which is a set of structures in the brain that have to do with selfing, thinking about yourself. So you don't want to be thinking about yourself. You just want your full attention on this one target. Now, because of the way that the brain is impacted, this seems to be particularly good for concerns related to frontal lobe functioning, right? So if you want to improve your focus or attention, your executive functioning, if you're struggling with some sort of ADHD type symptoms or maybe some sort of cognitive decline, this is a really great practice. Again, because you're exercising that frontal lobe and really getting it to function in a more efficient way. So this is one style. Mindfulness is the next style. And this is a tricky one because the term mindfulness, of course, is kind of used in our culture to mean just about everything. We're using it in a much more specific way to talk about a way of paying attention where you kind of move into an observer role. So you're being aware of your thoughts, your feelings, your body sensations. Maybe you're being aware of what's happening in the environment, sensory information, but you're doing so in a way that you're not connecting to it directly. Meaning, what I mean by that is you're not attaching some sort of narrative to it. So you're not getting caught in some sort of cognitive loop about making up a story about what's your experiences. You're simply experiencing things as they are in the present moment. And so when we do this, guess what? We're also quieting down the default mode network. Because remember, that's about selfing. It's about referencing things to your sense of self. And with this type of practice, we're actually not doing that either. We're not creating a story about it. We're just experiencing whatever is. So in this way, you're actually shifting your attention in a different way. In some ways, you're disinhibiting your attention so that it's just a wide field of attention. So rather than zoning in on one thing, it's this wider perspective. So this is a really good practice for things like learning to, guess what? Distance yourself from your thoughts and your feelings and your body sensations. So making it a really good match for things like stress and anxiety, where we often get kind of caught in our thoughts and our feelings. So it's like learning to take a step back from that and look at it more objectively. So that's the way we're kind of using this term. Then we have open heart. So this is going to be any kind of a meditation practice where you're intentionally activating a positive emotional state. So it could be a loving kindness practice. It could be a compassion practice, gratitude, forgiveness. So any type of meditation where that is kind of the point, is to activate this felt sense of a positive emotion, fits under this umbrella. And you can imagine that this might be a really good practice for anybody struggling with mood concerns or wanting to become more empathic, learning how to take perspectives better, being more loving and kind. And what we see in the brain is that actually it's more activation. So there's not as much deactivation here, but we're activating specific parts of the brain that are involved in emotion, recognizing emotions, moving towards something, which is a more positive approach. It's an approach motivation, as well as some of that same body-based awareness, because we really want to feel these emotions in the body with this type of practice. So this is one of my favorites, at least right now. My favorite changes over time, but at the moment, this is one of my favorites. Then we have quiet mind. Again, kind of a stereotype of meditation. The idea that we should be getting into a place where there's nothing happening, where the mind is empty, it's blank. There's filled with spaciousness. And, this is a state that we achieve. Maybe that's not the best word to use. Achieve sounds like we're trying for something, which often doesn't work with meditation. If you try too hard, it doesn't work. It's like a paradox. However, this is a state that we often find ourselves in or develop. Maybe that's a better way to put it, over time. And so it's kind of about learning how to drop into a state where all of that busyness in the brain sort of falls away. And so obviously this type of a practice could be good for just about everything. Learning how to quiet down your internal state, you can imagine, might be good for depression, anxiety, as well as all kinds of other complicated things. Essentially, one of the things that we're doing here is we're disrupting our normal way of seeing ourselves because we're quieting down all of that internal noise, which a lot of that internal noise is actually us talking to ourselves about who we are, what we're doing, what's happening. So if we can quiet that down, there's space for us to become something different, to have more flexibility in how we see ourselves. So not surprisingly, this one also quiets down the default mode network. In fact, that's pretty much the primary thing that you're doing here. So because you're not directing your attention to something else, it's just quieting everything down. So just relaxing that default mode network. So you see that that's a theme, right? With at least 3 of these practices is quieting the default mode network. The other issue then is, well, what is happening, right? In terms of what brain areas are involved. And then the 5th style. So this is kind of the newest one that we have been talking about. We've actually been teaching this for years with the EEG-guided practices, but we haven't been teaching it outside of that because it's a little bit of a trickier one to learn how to get into or to teach people about, unless you're using something like EEG technology. And so this is really about going deep, right? So getting into a really relaxed state where instead of it just being quiet, it's almost like you're unlocking the subconscious. So these deeper places in the mind. So it's a little bit like a hypnagogic state when you're falling asleep, right? So it's like you're just at the edge of falling asleep and being awake, falling awake, right? Like some people will use that term because you want to sort of like ride that line. And when you do that, what happens is that the subconscious is able to sort of work its way up into the conscious mind. So kind of like what happens when you wake from a dream and you can remember, what happens, at least sometimes, right? So you're bringing the subconscious material into the conscious. So this is a really powerful practice. It can be really good for dealing with trauma, obviously, right? If you're kind of integrating what's happening in the subconscious mind into the conscious mind. It can be good for just inner exploration, sort of journey work. Interestingly, it's also really good for peak performance. There have been multiple studies showing that this type of practice increases creativity. Again, maybe because you're unlocking the subconscious, right? Where we tend to have a lot of that creative process happening. So rather than looking at specific parts of the brain with this one, we're looking at specific brain waves. So in particular, we want to reduce alpha and increase theta. So that's that in-between state that we're looking for, that hypnagogic state. So these are the 5 styles that we work with. It doesn't mean these are the only things that exist, right? But it's the 5 that we understand pretty well. and know how to work with using EEG equipment. The other thing that I would say is that outside of doing an EEG type session, we may move in and out of these different types of states within one meditation, right? You may do a meditation that has elements of focus, elements of mindfulness, elements of quiet mind, all in the same meditation. And that's fine. That's not a problem. But what we're really doing here is saying, like, let's just zone in on one particular aspect of the meditation and really get strong with that, right? Now, you can practice lots of them, but it's really about developing that capacity in particular ways of attending. Now, one of the questions that came up early in our work was, well, how do we help people figure out which style is the best one for them? Because we kind of talked about how different styles may be better for different things. And so we've actually created an inventory that you can take on our website, the NeuroMeditation Styles Inventory. It's got a series of questions. We just updated it again. So now I think there's 30 something questions. And essentially what it's doing is just asking you to reflect on certain items that are linked to each one of these styles. So after you take the inventory, you get a score for each of those 5 styles, letting you know which one might be the best match for what your goals are at this moment. So this is a nice tool to use. And actually, it's something that you can use over time. You may take it today and score something, whatever you score. Maybe you come up high in quiet mind, but then after you've been practicing for a while, you take it again. And now maybe quiet mind that score is actually pretty good, but there's something else that could use more attention. So you can use the scale in lots of different ways. There's also, it's beyond the scope of this talk, but there's also some additional supplemental scales that we use in this to help people figure out which style would be good for them if they have other challenges that may get in the way of meditation. So things like relaxation-induced anxiety or dissociation, right? So if people experience some of those challenges, then that may influence how we think about a good starting place. So that's also incorporated into this scale. Okay, that's a very quick overview of the 5 styles that we're dealing with. Now we want to talk about how we work with this using EEG neurofeedback. So the basic idea, right? So we can think of meditation in a broad way as a systematic mental training designed to challenge habits of attending, thinking, feeling, and perceiving. So regardless of which style we're looking at, one of the things that we're doing is we're intentionally engaging our consciousness in a way that's different than the way we normally operate. So we're looking at ourselves in a different way. We're paying attention differently. We're engaging with our thoughts and our feelings in a different way. So that's true no matter which style of meditation we're using. And then neurofeedback, that's the other part of the equation. Well, what is that? Well, it's basically biofeedback with brain waves. So what we know is that if you can monitor something in your physiology, and it really doesn't matter what it is, skin temperature, blood pressure, heart rate variability, brain blood flow, muscle tension, brain waves, anything that you can measure and monitor, and then give somebody live feedback about what's happening, we know that people can learn to change their physiology. So if you give them feedback, they can change it. So that's what neurofeedback is we're monitoring brainwave activity, feeding that information back to somebody in real time so that they can learn to modify their own response. So of course, what we're doing is combining these two powerful practices. Meditation is powerful all by itself, so is neurofeedback. So we're just combining them to sort of enhance what you might be able to get from each of those individually. So just to break it down a little bit more, like, well, wait a minute, how does this work exactly? So essentially what we're doing is we're going to be putting EEG sensors on specific parts of the head, on the scalp. to measure brainwave activity. And there's a lot of different ways to do this, and we'll show you the systems that we've been working with, which are now they're Bluetooth and wireless, which makes our lives much simpler than using wired, gel, goop, super expensive equipment. So most of these meditations that we've been describing can actually be worked with a single sensor, which also makes our life easy. So like, just to give an example, this is my favorite system at the moment to use. And it's got a single, so it's a baseball cap. This is from a company called BrainBit. Here's the amplifier. It's on the back of the cap. And then basically you've got this sensor, this electrode. So it's kind of springy. There's no gel involved. And so you connect this electrode to the cap, to the baseball cap, with a magnet. So essentially, I can put the sensor wherever I want and use the magnet on the outside to hold it in place. And then literally all I have to do is put the cap on and, kind of wiggle the sensor, and you're ready to go. So these are the kind of systems that we're using now that, again, just make things a little bit more efficient. So like I said, most of the meditations can be done with a single sensor. Some of them, it's better to have two sensors because we may be looking at two parts of the brain at the same time. So an example of this, of using a single sensor. So for an eyes closed focus meditation, the part of the brain that we really want to look at is right here. So frontal midline. So we're, from an EEG perspective, this is FZ, that's the location. And what we're looking at is theta activity. And again, we don't need to get into the weeds of all of that, but we're looking at one thing in one brainwave. So it's actually a pretty straightforward protocol. So we're measuring the EEG activity in specific regions of the brain. And then the person who's meditating and wearing the cap, they're getting a signal, right? They're getting some sort of information about what their brain waves are doing. So essentially what we do is we connect, we'll just stick with the same example. We're measuring theta activity and we want it to be elevated. We want there to be an increase of theta. So what happens is that signal, that theta signal, is connected to music. So we can choose any kind of music we want. You can pick any kind of YouTube video to use as feedback, or you can upload music, whatever. And what we usually use is something like some kind of meditation music. It's nice, it's calming, sets the right tone. And so essentially what happens is while you're meditating, if you're in a focused state, in this example, then that music is going to increase in volume. Not so loud that it's obnoxious, but loud so that it's like it's clear that you're in the right zone. So that's your feedback, neurofeedback. That's your feedback telling you like you're there. Just stay there, right? Now, we know what happens in a focused meditation. You stay there for 5 or 10 seconds, and then you get distracted. Well, as soon as you get distracted, guess what? Your brain waves change, and then that audio signal decreases in volume. It drops down. So not so much that it disappears, because that would be obnoxious if you're trying to meditate and the music's cutting in and cutting out, right? Like that would not be pleasant. We've tried that. It's not pleasant, right? So instead, the volume just goes down. And that's your cue, right? Because when the volume drops, it catches your attention. And so then, you're sitting there meditating and it's like, oh, wait a minute, what just happened? Oh, wow, I was thinking about my day. Okay, refocus. And then guess what? The audio signal comes back up. If it's an eyes open meditation, we can also use a visual signal as well. So it could be anything, again, but what happens is the screen will dim or get brighter depending on how well you're holding that focus meditation. So as eyes open focus, what you want is the screen to be all the way bright, the volume to be all the way up. And if either one of those signals start to shift, that's your cue that maybe you're off track. Now, I don't want to get too sciencey and nerdy, but I just want to bring up the fact that this has been actually studied in a handful of published research articles, this type of an approach. And the evidence is very clear that it works. So the first study that I've just got highlighted here, you can see source space EEG neurofeedback links subjective experience with brain activity during effortless awareness meditation. Okay, so to break it down, what they did was they basically were doing what we just described. They were monitoring gamma brain waves, very fast brain waves, and they were measuring it at the back of the head, the hub of the default mode network. Remember the default mode network, thinking about yourself, getting caught in stories, narratives. And because gamma is a fast brainwave, they wanted that to go down. Like, we don't want the default mode network to be active. So they were monitoring this and feeding the information back to people while they were meditating. And here's what they found, right? The highlights. Both novice and experienced meditators showed decreased activity in that posterior cingulate, the hub of the default mode network, while they were meditating. So we kind of already knew that, right, from lots of other research, that the default mode network gets quiet, right, when you're in a meditative state. So they saw that. But then they also found that both groups, the novices and the experienced, were able to control that signal, the feedback, by practicing their meditation. So again, this is one of the first studies that made a really clear connection and said, yeah, this works. Like, we can combine neurofeedback with meditation in a way that's very effective, and people can use that information to deepen their practice. Here's one more, just a real quick one. This one, they were actually using an fMRI. It's so funny, right, when they do these studies, because it's like, man, you guys are overcomplicating things. Like, it doesn't have to be this complicated. But they basically did the same thing, put people in an fMRI scanner, measuring the same place, the posterior cingulate, the hub of the default mode network. This time had them doing a focus meditation. And what they found was that both, again, the meditators and the non-meditators reported activation of the posterior cingulate when they were mind wandering, and then a deactivation during meditation. So the same thing that we saw in the other study. They also found in this study that the experienced meditators were able to intentionally decrease activation using the feedback. Now, in their study, the novice group, it wasn't statistically significant. However, if you look at these two charts on the screen, it's interesting because essentially what these images are showing is that when the line is blue and decreases, that means there was a decrease of activity. And when it's red and it goes up, there was an increase of activity. So look at the meditators for a minute, the experienced meditators. So at the beginning, they're a little bit inconsistent, but then look what happens once they get going. I mean, they just completely reduced activity in that default mode network. And it just got deeper and deeper and deeper and quieter. Now, the non-meditators, the novice group, it was a little bit more hit and miss. However, I would argue that if you look at that second half of the meditation, it's actually pretty strong, and it's actually much stronger than the first half in terms of them learning how to use the feedback signal. So even though it didn't come up as statistically significant for that group, to me, it looks like there's something important happening there where people are learning how to use the signal to get into deeper states. So, really this idea of combining EEG meditation with our EEG neurofeedback with meditation, for us, it's really been sort of a game changer. And there's a few things where I think it's really important and why this is so useful. So the first is you're getting some sort of an objective insight into your meditation process, right? Because this is one of the complaints that we hear from people all the time is it's like, I have no idea if I'm doing this right. People try to meditate and I'm like, am I doing it? It's like, how do you know? How do you know if you're doing it, right? And so this provides a real objective way of helping you know if you're in the right state or not, and helping you kind of learn how to get there, which is the second bullet. So, accelerated learning. Well, if you're getting feedback, it's going to be much faster to learn where it is that you're trying to go. Where is my attention supposed to be? How does this work? Well, if every time your mind wanders or some other process happens and you get feedback, you're going to learn much faster. The third one, personalization and tailored feedback. So, we can I mentioned this, but we can pick feedback that works for the individual. There's a lot of different ways to give feedback. So that can be personalized. And the protocols can also be personalized. So we have these 5 different styles, which actually you'll see in a minute, turned into 6 different protocols. So a protocol is, the specific approach for each of those. But even those, we can even modify a little bit to make it more personalized depending on the exact person and what they're trying to do. Enhanced engagement and motivation. So, you can imagine, if you've never done this before, you can imagine that if you're getting real-time feedback and you're getting numbers associated with your practice, it might be a little more motivating to engage with this. And, I've been meditating a long time, a long time in my lifetime, so what, 25 or 6 years or something. And honestly, again, for those of you who are long-term meditators, you can probably relate. There gets to be points where it just gets to be boring, right? Where it's like, okay, it's like, man, or you feel like you just plateaued, right? It's just kind of like, okay, like this isn't really going anywhere deeper. It's just kind of like staying here. You've kind of hit a level. Now, of course, if you stick with it, you're going to get somewhere else. But this, for me, has really been important to help me re-engage and deepen my practice when I felt kind of stuck or like I was, wasn't really moving anywhere. Practical applications for mental health and peak performance. We kind of mentioned that a little bit at the beginning, but each of these styles can be paired with specific mental health concerns. So it can also be sort of an adjunctive approach to working with things like anxiety or depression or whatever. Pick something, right? We know meditation is helpful for a lot of different mental health concerns. So makes sense, right? What we've done is just try to get as specific as we can. It's like, well, if you're interested in anxiety, of reducing anxiety, probably nobody's interested in anxiety. If you're interested in reducing anxiety, mindfulness is going to be better, right? So you can identify which approach is going to get you there. And then democratizing meditation with accessibility. So again, this is important for us because we want this to be accessible to everybody. And, for people that live in an area where maybe there's not a meditation center, or maybe they don't want to go to a meditation center, or maybe the meditation center is Buddhist and they don't identify as Buddhist, right? Well, now we're stuck. Like, how can we help people learn about meditation in a way that is accessible to them no matter where they are? And that's what's great about this system is it's actually a remote system. So you don't have to come into the office to do this. Now, these pictures are the old school approach. So this is how we started doing this. So you got this full cap of electrodes on your head. You've got this fancy, complicated, expensive neurofeedback equipment monitoring your brain and doing all kinds of stuff. And this works. That's how we got started. But it's complicated and it's expensive. And you got to come to my office or somebody else's office that has this stuff every time you want to do it. So even though this was a good way to get started, was obviously not something that could be expanded in the way we want. Now, things have changed. So there's a number of EEG hardware systems that are available that are Bluetooth and wireless that have really good signal quality. So one of the issues several years ago was that even though there was some Bluetooth and wireless systems available, the signals were not good. So you'd put the thing on and you couldn't get a good signal, which then made it even more frustrating, right? You're trying to get this thing hooked up and it's not working. Things have improved a lot. So The system that we're going to be talking about, the software system, is from a company called Divergence Neuro. But Divergence works with other companies that produce EEG headgear. And so there's a lot of options. So the ones that are available now to use are these 6. So Synchrony has 2 different devices, Neurosity, the Neurosity Crown, and then BrainBit. And I kind of showed you the baseball cap with BrainBit. And, Synchrony has one that's basically the exact same thing, the Synchrony Uno. And so, what's nice about some of these systems, so for me, my favorites at the moment, no offense to Synchrony, I just haven't tried the Synchrony device. I really like the BrainBit system. I especially like the Colibri, that's the baseball cap one I just showed you, as well as the BrainBit Flex. So the Colibri has one sensor, but it's a baseball cap. It's easy to use. You put the thing on, you put an ear clip on, you're done. And you can move the sensor anywhere you want. And for me, that's important because, like we said earlier, different parts of the brain might be involved. Well, so you have to move the sensor around. You can't just leave it in one spot. The BrainBit Flex, even though it's not quite as attractive, right? You got this like funny looking swim cap thing. It actually has 4 sensors and you can move all 4 of the sensors. So again, you've got a lot of flexibility with that in terms of different protocols you can use. You can also do some assessments using that system. Even with 4 electrodes, you can actually get a pretty good assessment of somebody's functioning. So these are the hardware options that exist at the moment. There's going to be more coming out as well, but this is where we stand at the moment. So there's 2 elements to the system. So there's the client side of things, or the student, right? The person who's using this for meditation. And then there's the clinician or the teacher side of things. So if I'm the teacher or the instructor or whatever, essentially what I do is I go into my web portal and I set, let's pretend you're my client. I set you up as a client in my system, and then I send you whatever meditation protocols we decide are good for you. So I send, maybe I send you more than one. I send you a focus protocol, I send you mindfulness, whatever. Now, the client or the student, they've got an app on their phone or their iPad that is how they run the session. So essentially, the web-based portal is communicating with the app. So the client or the student can literally be anywhere. And so, because it's Bluetooth, you put the cap on, you open your phone, and you can run your session right off of your phone. And so what's cool about that is, again, it just makes it very easy and very accessible. But the other part that's cool is that data from the session goes to the clinician portal instantaneously or near instantaneously. So I could be in Oregon, which is where I live, and I could be working with somebody in Germany, and I could be watching their data basically real time, right? And I could be making adjustments or using that as a way to help coach them through their meditation or whatever. So it just really opens up a lot of possibilities of how you can use this because it's all, it's all remote. So I mentioned that there are 6 protocols. Now there's 5 little things here, but we have a different protocol for eyes open focus versus eyes closed focus. The way that we monitor the brain is a little bit different. So we actually have 6 protocols that are ready to go. We've already talked about what those are, so we don't need to get into that. And so here's kind of what the platform offers, right? So at the beginning, we usually will do some sort of an assessment. So I have people take the NeuroMeditation styles inventory, right? Like we kind of talked about. But then the platform also has other scales in it that I could send to my student or to my client. So we could measure things like psychological flexibility or depression or mindfulness or whatever we're interested in. send them a scale to complete at various points in their meditation training so we can start to assess and evaluate, are things improving? Are things shifting the way that we want? Then, of course, number 2 is the training, right? So we already talked about this, a lot, so I don't need to go over this more. Got the 6 protocols, we can customize it. And then number 3, of course, we can track things. So we can track it with the questionnaires. We can also track it by looking at the EEG data. The system saves all the data. And so you can look and see how things are changing over time, or you can pull up one particular session to evaluate it, what was happening in that session for somebody. How were things shifting and moving? It can be good for sort of coaching to help people figure out what their internal process was. And then, of course, number 4 here, continually kind of updating the process to go further, to go deeper. So we can make the protocols harder. We can shift from an easier protocol to a more challenging protocol. There's a lot of ways to kind of help people expand and push themselves. So what I wanted to do was show you a quick demo of what this looks like, right? Because we can talk about it, and that's one thing, but it's more useful for most people to see it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to stop sharing my screen real quick. Okay, so I'm going to make Kathleen the host so that she can share. So she's on an iPad right now and has the system set up, hopefully. It's always dangerous trying to do a live demo. All right.
Okay, that's working, right?
Yep, looks like it.
Okay.
So as she's kind of getting set up here, so what she's got on the baseball cap that I showed you earlier, and she's going to be doing a eyes open focus meditation. So go ahead and log in.
Okay. Well, I'm putting the cap on, so I'll tell you what I'm doing right now. So
Okay.
we found that I have to put a little bit of water on my head to get a better connection. That's an easy hack where you don't have to have gel. And then I had to take one of my earrings out because there's an ear clip that you have to put on. And then I turned it on because I always forget to turn it on.
It helps to turn it on.
It helps to turn it on. It's true.
Yeah.
So, okay, putting the ear clip on, adjusting the cap, getting the thing just I don't have a lot of hair, but for some reason I just get a better signal if I got water in there.
Yeah, and that's one of the things, right, is even though it's a dry electrode, for some people, it's just a little bit trickier to get a consistent signal. And so that's one of the easy hacks is you just spray a tiny little bit of water on there. Okay, so she's on her iPad. So she's the client. So she just logged in. She's using my account. You can see it says, "Welcome back, Jeff." And so because it's my account, I've got all the different protocols on here. So I'm going to have her select the eyes open focus 5 minutes. So it's just a short one. So go ahead and select that protocol.
Which happens to be my style that I'm doing right now anyway, so it works out.
So that works out. So the first thing it's going to do is look for your sensor. And you can see it highlighted at the bottom, Calibri red. That's the one we have. So click on that.
To wear the Calibri,
then it gives you some instructions on how to put it on your head
cap based on your head size and mounted the electrode correctly before putting on. First, press the button on the device for 3 seconds to turn the Calibri on. Then gently.
We don't need to watch all that. So you can say, okay, it's on your head. We got it. It's good to go. Then there's instructions about the specific meditation, which we also skipped. So now the next thing it's going to do is it's going to look and tell you how good your signal is. So you can see where the sensor is on that little head map. It's at the back of the head, sitting on the default mode network. And we want the signal strength to be above 70. So here it's at 100. That's great. So you can go ahead and click start.
When I move, I always notice that it goes down. It's interesting.
Start your meditation practice while the baseline recording is in progress. This ensures that the threshold levels are calibrated to the most optimal setting for your session.
So basically what it's doing is it's getting a baseline because it has to figure out somewhere to put your threshold, right? Your threshold is the line that says you have to be above or below this with your brain waves. Well, it's got to know where to put it. So for the first 30 seconds, it's just getting a baseline. So it's just saying like, well, where are your brain waves hanging out at? And then it's going to find a starting place to put your threshold. So now she gets to pick which kind of feedback she wants. And you can see there's a ton of options on here. We're just going to go with the one that we already have loaded, which is a YouTube video. So really any YouTube video you could find could be used as feedback. Now, again, it's going to have you check your signal one more time before the session starts. So it looks great. So go ahead and hit start. Now she's doing an eyes open focus meditation. So what you should be seeing is that the screen, so it looks good right now, right? So she's doing a great job. So the brighter it is, and you may be able to hear the audio is a little bit quiet. But what you'll notice just by watching this is that the screen will dim periodically. There you go.
Yeah.
Yep. So, whenever your mind wanders or you get distracted, then the screen is going to dim and the volume is at the same time going to decrease. So that's the signal, right? And so again, you could pick whatever you want for visual feedback, but this one is pretty cool. I think it works well for an eyes open focus because it's interesting, but it's not so engaging that you're going to get caught up in thoughts or, something about it, hopefully. That's what we want. Yeah. And look how clean that is, right? Like, she had it just a second ago. So I'm going to actually be quiet for just about 30 seconds because you can imagine she's trying to meditate and I'm talking and she's listening to me. So I'm going to shut up for just about 30 seconds and just let her kind of do her thing.
Thank you.
Okay, now that probably wasn't 30 seconds, but so the other thing that we've got built into this, which is really cool, is if Kathleen just taps the screen. So there's a couple of options that she has on here. So it goes away quickly, right? But So you can see your signal strength and tap it again. At the top, there's a little castle looking thing. So go in there and tap the castle. Now, this allows her to change the difficulty of her session herself. So she doesn't need me to change it for her. So if she feels like it's too difficult, like she feels like, man, I'm meditating, but I'm not getting a lot of feedback. Well, she could tap the easier button and it's going to just slightly adjust the threshold for her. Or the other way, right? Like, let's pretend that it was too easy. And she's like, okay, wait a minute. I'm getting feedback when my mind's wandering, right? Well, you could make it more difficult. So it actually seems like it's in a pretty good spot, honestly, where it's at right now, because you want the fluctuations, right? So I would probably just leave it alone, but I wanted to show you that because it's a really useful, thing that got added into the protocol or to these sessions, giving the client the ability to, modify things. You also saw at the bottom of that screen, if you tap it again real quick, Kathleen.
Yep.
And just, whoops, there we go. At the bottom, you see that volume, min volume, max volume. So the client can adjust that as well. So that what it's doing is saying, what's the range of the shift in the volume as it goes up or down? And so that can be a really useful thing for people to use as well, right? So that you're getting the maximum amount of feedback without it being too annoying. And there's some individual variability there. Okay, Kathleen, so let's have you tap the screen and exit out. So go to the top and hit the X button and say, end this part. Okay, so she finished her session and you can see, right, that it's got, okay, your signal strength, 91%, great. Reward rate was 41%, great. Time trained. So she completes the session. Hit the complete session button. And done. And then it just logs it, right? So at the moment, she has, let me have my screen back, will you?
Sure.
Thanks, Kathleen.
Whoops.
She's going back in.
I am trying to go back in.
She didn't get enough. She wants more. At the moment, the amount of feedback that the client gets at the end, they kind of only get a few things. However, in the next update for the software, they're going to make it so that the clinician can actually give the client access to whatever kinds of data they want. And so I'm going to show you from the clinician side what I get to see from that session that she just ran. Now, I could have pulled it up live and looked at it while it was happening live. But of course, we couldn't do that at the same time. We couldn't share two screens simultaneously. So I'm going to open up my session. Let me share my screen now. Okay, so now I'm back into the portal on my end of things. And so here's just a simple way to go in, right? So I went to my profile as a client, and here's recently completed activities, eyes open, focus, 4-3, that was today. So I can view that. I can go in here, and I've got all the data. I've got, what was the longest reward duration, the average reward duration, her signal strength, her microvolts of, in this case, we were measuring alpha activity. I can see her entire session of monitoring her alpha over the course of the, 3.5 or 4 minutes or whatever it was. You can scale this differently if you want to get more kind of detailed into looking at certain aspects of it. It's even got the feedback intensity. So when she was getting the strongest feedback and the least feedback. So look, she was doing really good at the end there. That's probably when I stopped talking. So you can see, she was getting a lot more reward here toward the end. You get a frequency spectrum of her brain waves. So you can kind of see the whole spectrum of brainwave activity. And, you can pull up all kinds of other data as well. So you can look at stuff that wasn't even what we were training. So you can see here, there's actually several things on here. So, even though what we were training or looking at was alpha, 8 to 12 hertz, I can actually add other things on here if I want to see, well, what was gamma doing? I'm just curious. Well, we can look at that. And that's this one. It's super low, right? Because it's gamma. So I'd have to shift my scaling to be able to see. So there's the gamma. You can look at different ratios. So there's a lot of different things that you can do kind of in the back end. And of course, if she were to do a whole bunch of sessions with this, you would also be able to track all of that and see all the sessions kind of compared to each other and see changes over time.